Hello and welcome to the People Analytics Leadership Forum. My name is Jayanne and I'm the co-organiser alongside Gary Brown, who will be leading you through the session today. So whilst you're all joining, I just wanted to run through some quick housekeeping. All attendees are automatically on listen-only mode. However, we would like this to be an interactive session and welcome any questions or comments that you have. You should see a question box on your control panel, so please post your questions in here for us to answer during the event. We will get through as many of these throughout the session as we can today. We plan for the session to be 1 hour long, finishing at 1:30. We will also be recording the session and you will have access to this after today's event. So that's all for me. I hope you enjoyed the session today and I will now hand over to Gary to get us started. Gary, over to you.
Welcome. So for those who don't know, my name is Gary Brown. I'm commercial lead here at Activate Intelligence. So I'd like to welcome you to the first video of the People Analytics Leadership Forum events that Activate Intelligence have launched, and we'll be holding a number of these events throughout the year, both online and in the real world as well. But we decided to launch the People Analytics Leadership Forum as a way for people analytics experts and practitioners and HR leaders and workforce planning leaders as well to really come together, to look at some of the issues that they're facing, to share best practice, to hear from and learn from their peers and hear how others are actually tackling some of the challenges that you have and some of the objectives that you want to meet, and how people analytics is actually helping, or actually can help increase the impact of the HR function on the business, as well as how it's helping HR leaders themselves, so increase your individual impact within your businesses, within your companies also. So again, thank you very much for attending. We've got a few more people joining as well. So I'm going to introduce the panelists and then we'll go into some of the questions that we've received. So the first I'd like to introduce is Alessandro Linari. So Alessandro he's associate partner of People Analytics UK and EMEA at Aon. And for those that don't know, Aon is the multinational financial services firm, over 120 countries, 50,000 employees, with a market cap around $10 billion. Alessandro comes with a depth of knowledge in this field. He was also the former head of People Analytics at Vodafone UK, where he introduced People Analytics to Vodafone and built the function in the UK, and really focused on maximizing business value by aligning the priorities across HR and business. So he comes with a wealth of knowledge from that perspective. Alessandro, you also did an article that made David Green's list of the best HR articles in October 2021. So you know, obviously accolades goes out to you. I mean, I wish one of mine did that, but it's never going to happen. So, but obviously Alessandro is well known and well respected in his field, and obviously holds a PhD in computer science as well from University of Bologna. So going to our next panelist. Our next panelist is Oliver Kasper. Oliver is Group Head of People Analytics at Richemont Group, and Richemont Group is the luxury group behind Cartier, Chloe, Montblanc, Net-a-Porter, and many other luxury brands. And having previously set up the People Analytics function at Swarovski, where he was Head of Corporate People Analytics and People Strategy for 6 years, Oliver is also a lecturer on People Analytics at University of Zurich, and also guest lecturer at University of Warwick Business School. So again, thank you, welcome Oliver for coming along. And then finally is Dave Milner. Dave Milner is obviously, we've worked with Dave Milner previously before. Dave is an occupational psychologist and HR futurist with over 30 years of consulting with global clients. He is a founder of HR Curator, where he has consulted for the likes of Experian, AstraZeneca, British Heart Foundation and the NHS and many others on people analytics and HR issues. And he's also the co-author of Introduction to People Analytics, a practical guide to data-driven HR. So I wanted to ask all three panelists, we'll start with you, Alessandro. What do you see as being a priority this year, and what can you expect in 2023 in relation to people analytics?
Thanks, Gary, and well, good afternoon to everybody. It's a good question. It's an interesting question because what I can see, and I can provide my perspective from what I see across people I talk to, clients, and I see that there is uncertainty in general in the business world. What I can see from HR analytics in particular is that there is a focus on, if you like, what matters. So on initiatives like that we always said that people analytics should be at the center of decision making, should be aligned to business priorities and to really what is important for HR. I can see that this is becoming even more important in the coming years. In a way, it's going to be it's a positive thing. In terms of themes, I see strategic workforce planning, skills, DE&I, and again, the reason why I think these are coming as at the top of people's minds is again because it's strategic workforce planning is in the space of workforce optimization. So when you come to uncertain times and that are very hard to predict, as these next year, probably the following year as well, companies are starting thinking, okay, what should I do? How can I optimize? How can I not predict but how can I prepare for something that is unknown? And that's where these topics are really coming at the top of the discussion for me.
Okay, great. I guess the same question to you, Oliver, as well. So what, from your perspective, and it may be very similar, but from your perspective, what do you see as kind of be priorities in HR and in HR analytics in particular?
Thanks for the question. And obviously a lot of similarity also what Alessandro has said. So it strongly depends in which economic situation your company is, right? So it could be that you're, for example, in the food industry, which is quite stable, or you could be in low value consumer goods, for example, which during a crisis is hit first. So it really depends a lot on the business context. But I think topics that will continue to get more important is topics which are on the radar is, for example, data privacy. So you see that people analytics is getting more broad and broad. People understand what you can do with data and they want to be informed. Is this more from a overall, from a law point of view that you need to ensure data privacy, but also more ethical standards which the company would like to provide to their employees based on their general analytics, but also people analytics function. What I see also, be it regulatory or on a voluntary basis, DE&I. So this is definitely a topic which will continue. And also strategic workforce planning, what Alessandro mentioned. I think the reason is, especially in uncertain times, there is even more necessity to plan long term, right? Because it will go up and down, definitely. In the past, like 10, 15 years ago, the companies were reacting in a sense of releasing people. I think this trend is a bit hopefully gone. And just like ensure how can I have a highly performing workforce from a long-term point of view. I think the overall theme definitely need to be, because there will always be too less people in people analytics. How can I provide the highest business value in the business context of the company? This is an evergreen, but this will stay for the next 10 years. I think that's ultimately important. And reducing and optimizing the operational part of people analytics and increasing more the strategic fun part of people analytics with business impact. So that's a bit my view on 2023 and a bit onwards also.
Okay, great. So I guess that's a good segue into David, asking the same question to you, Dave, because I was saying reducing the operational and increasing the strategic side of people analytics. So do you have a similar view, or do you see other things as well on top of that as being a priority for yourself?
Yeah, similar, I think. I might just have a different perspective on it. I know people analytics as a discipline has been around since, I don't know, 2010. It seems like forever, but probably as a discipline, probably since about 2010. And if you look back over the last 12 years, the economic indicators, the economic trends and patterns and everything else has been fairly okay, fairly positive. And so people analytics teams have been operating in a world where, finance and money may not necessarily have been as important from an investment point of view. But if we look to 2023, I think people analytics teams are going to have to make themselves a necessity. I think they're going to have to think about, why are we spending time on reporting when it can be automated? I think we need to be really focusing on making the most of the fantastic expertise that's in these people analytics teams. And I think we need to make sure that we're therefore really impacting on the things that the CEO, the CFO, COO, etc., really are interested in, which is going to be about probably spending less money, maybe managing, costs, certainly looking for new income streams, etc. So I think it's a variation on a theme. And I think this alignment to, strategic business goals is going to be really important. I think we've got to make sure that we really prioritize the things that are going to make business impact, not just HR impact. So that's where I would see it. Okay, great. All right, perfect. So as a CHRO, as a HR director, where do I start? I'll probably ask that to Alessandro. Where would I start? Where's the best place to start, and how and where would I start if I want to start using people analytics more effectively in my organization? I recognize it's much more of a necessity, as Dave said. Where do I start?
I think this is a good question. The way I would play this back to the CHRO is I would ask, what do you need? It's what do you need to succeed, and why you can't do without it. The reason I'm asking this is because, going back to what both Dave and Oliver said, there is a requirement in general for alignment to business. Okay, and this is true now, but this has always been true. But the real question is, and I've seen this, I've had first-hand experience in building the analytics function in Vodafone. I've seen that talking to lots of people, is there is always a risk of becoming irrelevant or entering an operational or a BAU situation. Now, the question I will ask to the CHRO is, what is that you need? Is it some reporting? And if it's just the reporting that you need, or if it's a technology, if it's a better, I hear this a lot. Oh, we don't have access to attrition. I don't have access to headcount reporting, so I will spin off a people analytics function. My challenge to that is be careful, because the people analytics function is going to be a hit on the budget. It's going to be expenses, and you need to focus on return on investment. So the first question is, where do we want to focus? And my suggestion, I think Oliver, Dave agree with me, is it's not on the reporting is sometimes is a necessity, but there are other ways to address those needs. It's what is the business needs now, and sometimes it can be cost, it can be better productivity, it can an optimized workforce or something. So now, if we think about these big questions that the CHRO has the chance to contribute to, because the CHRO is managing the workforce and the finances managing the finances and so on and so forth, then the question is, how can analytics support me in my key priorities? And then who is the best person? And that's, if you start thinking into this, it's an operating model question. You working backwards for what I need, and then finding the need, because the actual answer is find the right person that can answer these questions. So forget about the technology, forget about the data almost, because the right person will know what to do. But if the answer to me is find the right person that knows what people analytics is, which will be a senior person maybe, and they will guide you through the necessary steps. Do not start from the technology, because the technology is not an answer to business, it's just an enabler to, by the way, reporting and BAU.
Great. Perfect, great, thank you. Oliver, would you concur with that? I'd imagine you would. Would you add anything else to that as well?
Yeah, what I see in the market is that often, like, okay, well, everybody is talking since like 3-4 years. People analytics is quite prominent, and everybody says, I need a data scientist, right? Because that's people analytics. And that's the wrong angle, right? Because you look very high level in the people analytics problem. You need to say, okay, what problem do I want to solve? And there you need like business acumen, business understanding, hypothesis generation, so these kind of skills. Then you do a bit more the technical stuff of data science, data aggregation and stuff, and then you implement the results, very simplified. First, you need to have the skills in the team is first like getting what Dave and Alessandro said, what kind of problems would I like to solve? And this is not just asking the question CHRO and say, what problems do you have? There you need specific techniques, You need to go around the organization, ask the head of sales, the head of production, wherever you are in, and starting basing on discussion, getting in a feeling where does the company has problems. And then you can see what problems you have. Maybe at the beginning, you don't need even technology, right? You have maybe somewhere a server and a Python on top, and you can solve this technically. You don't need the millions of investment. I've also seen companies which invested millions, but they didn't know what to do with all of this technology. So really focusing on what problem do I want to solve? And then also the results you're getting out, implementing also the results, because you only create impact when you implement the results which you found out from a people analytics point of view. So this is at the beginning especially important, in finding the right people in the team to start in this way. And then when you move forward, then looking actually increasing the maturity step by step in various dimensions which you have. Is it from a business acumen, technology, governance, whatever, but then continuing and improving the overall maturity level, but really focusing on what problems would I like to solve to stay relevant, right? Because if you work on topics which are not relevant for the company, the likelihood that maybe you're not existing anymore at one time, you don't get investment, is high and will get higher in 2023.
Absolutely, perfect. And Dave, anything, obviously you work quite closely with HRDs regarding this particular issue, particularly if those who wanted to start as well. Have you had the similar kind of questions from CHROs? What's your kind of normal, what's the biggest challenge that you think you've had?
I completely agree with Alessandro and Oliver. I think it's about demonstrating value. I think it's not just about a people analytics team. I think it's, as Oliver is aspiring to, is it's also about developing the capability of your HR team, because you're only as good as the weakest link. And you may have some fantastic specialists who can do statistical stuff and whatever, but if HR aren't able to communicate it, to identify future business problems, etc., it puts a lot of pressure on the people analytics team. And I think whatever journey you're on, that journey at some stage has got to include improving the data-driven capability of your HR team. Even if you're just telling them, this is what you can do, but when you get this sort of thing, this is when you really need to bring in an expert, bring in a specialist. And I think, that's one of the things I seem to have spent the last 2.5 years talking to screens and thousands of HR people about that. And I think the HR community is starting to understand that data analytics is not going to go away, thankfully, and that actually this is our real opportunity. So I think there are two streams. There's about people analytics as a discipline, but there's also about the HR community. Don't forget them. That would be my thought.
Absolutely, brilliant. Okay, great. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next question. And again, it kind of feeds on from some of the points that you've already made. What do you think is going to be the focus for many organizations? Driving up performance on one side or reducing costs? And more importantly, how can people analytics actually be used to kind of help this? So I'm going to ask that of Oliver, because I know you've done quite a bit of that. So first of all, the first part of the question, what do you think the focus is going to be? Is it going to be driving performance or reducing costs?
I think it's both, to be honest, and it depends. Yeah. So you cannot really always separate both of it. It depends also on the context of the company where you are in. But maybe let me give you one example from one of my recent companies where I worked in. So there we looked actually at the beginning. What are the challenges of the company? So it was a retailer who was producing jewelry but also selling jewelry at the same time. And there we saw, obviously, when you are selling something, one of the key problems which you have is, how do I sell more, literally, right? So we looked on one of the key themes which we had in people analytics was literally looking at how can we improve sales with people analytics, and I will deep dive a bit later. So this was one of a business challenge which we had. And secondly, it was also more than 50% of the employees in the company were really producing stuff. And at that time, the company had also really problems with the quality of the products itself, and also with production efficiency. So we looked actually how can people analytics help to increase production quality and also production efficiency? Because this was, from a big theme at that time, really a business challenge, which obviously affected all departments, but also how people analytics could help. And I will give you also some examples. And there was a third topic, like every company is nowadays in transformation, right? And how can we also measure cultural change? Because this was important. It was a family-owned business who wanted also to do a bit a cultural change in the company. So the first thing, when we looked then on the retail side, at that time there were some countries where you had higher turnover, and the people analytics function was pretty new. We tried actually to bring money behind the people analytics support. So we looked literally, actually, there were some countries with pretty high turnover. So you could argue to make it black and white and say, okay, when we have high turnover, you just hire more people and need more HR. But what we did, we calculated actually what is the loss of sales from turnover. And this was in a 2 billion company, this was a very high 2-digit million number with the loss of sales. And suddenly you get attention actually to a turnover challenge which you have. And not only attention from an HR point of view, but then you get also attention from the business side, because they see, oh, turnover, it's a high double-digit million amount of number which I'm selling less. So then on the how to improve sales with people analytics, we looked at actually a couple of projects with predictive capabilities. We looked on how can we improve employee turnover. So we also looked, for example, there were several stores around the market, like 1,200 owned stores with around 10,000 employees. We looked also, are there patterns, for example, from an optimal staffing and staffing of the stores from an employee point of view. We looked also on the selection of sales staff, for example, or we looked also where in the employee life cycle would you need to have trainings for the sales staff to have the highest sales output and the highest engagement survey results, right? So, and also looking, even going into details actually, and looking, does a training, where does it need to be in the employee life cycle? Do you need to repeat it? What's the shelf time of the training? But also looking, for example, is the best delivery method online or offline delivery? So face-to-face or online delivery? And it's also for improving sales. And this was more or less also driven, this kind of projects, mainly with also business counterparts. So HR business partner were also involved, but business was literally quite interested in obviously improving sales. And this was leading in over years that there was a quarterly executive sales team meeting, and also people analytics could contribute also to this people analytics topic. So it's a bit performance, what we had in the beginning, improving sales by performance. But we did also a couple of cost optimization activities in this improving sales. But this was really hitting a problem which the company had at that time in certain markets, and this was having business impact and also quite a high appreciation also for the team, and made also lots of fun, right? So that's one topic. So for me, you cannot really separate, is it really cost or performance from my point of view.
You said an interesting word there towards the end there, Oliver. You said lots of fun as well. Sure. Could you expand on that a little bit? Because one of the things that often comes up, and I'm sure you probably have come across it yourself as well, is that a lot of people are afraid, if they're not coming from an analytics background or data background, they sometimes can be a little bit hesitant. Maybe a little bit scared of the whole subject matter, but you said there was also a lot of fun. So can you kind of explain how that process was fun? What did that kind of look like for yourselves in your organization?
Yeah, so there is a lot of actually also stakeholder management involved, right? So when you start this kind of project, and independently in which areas you need to find outside of the people analytics team also somebody who is willing to support you and who is also believing in people analytics. Because it can also be at the beginning, not every people analytics, especially strategic projects, Alessandro reminds that we had it this morning, it must not be that you have at the right first point you have a success, right? So you need on the counterpart, this was in our case the global head of retail. He was really believing in people analytics, and we were feeding him. We were sending him articles. We connected him with other people analytics leaders or other retail person who use people analytics strategically. So we built up the relationship with this global head of retail that he allowed us to work on this project and made him believe that it's beneficial for him and his team. And the fun factor was then, so the first step was telling for example, what's the loss of sales based on turnover? And then selecting a market where also the HR director and also the business counterpart in this country were really believing in people analytics. And then we built a first success case in one country. And in this one country, it worked then that this country where we had reducing turnover was the spokesperson to all of the other countries. So at the beginning, you need to push sometimes from a people analytics point of view to convince your stakeholders. But when you do it in the first beginning right, that's why it's important to focus really on business challenges. This gets more to a pull, and that you need to do more and more activities, and you're getting more and more step by step involved in more strategic discussions. And this is the fun part, right? When at one time from you pushing and selling your activities, the people in the organization see your service which you're delivering is really, really strategic. And also the fun part, what we started is in retail, and then the global head of retail was then talking to the global head of production, said, "Man, these guys, they are doing pretty interesting stuff. This help us a lot. Talk to them. Maybe they can also help you." So this was going over months and years, then like a fire around the organization, and we could work really on more strategic project, which was pretty fun. But this doesn't happen from today till tomorrow. And at least my team at that time and currently, they really had fun working on more strategic topics. Some people, they like to work on operational reporting, right? This could be fun, at least from my point of view. This is not the fun part of people analytics, the operational part.
No, and if I can add to what. No, if I just, sorry, I interrupt you, but Oliver, just to add to that, I had exactly the same experience. And I think the interesting part is that it feels like some people analytics is clearly has a very strong analytical and technical element to it, right? However, because of the sometimes it's because the low maturity of the HR function with regards to data or the business or the business in general, but sometimes it's just because it's the nature of the projects. The reality is that the people analytics ends up being at least half in data and analytics, but then half in stakeholder management, presentation. So what happens is that from a skills perspective, a people analytics professional needs to be half of this. I don't like calling data scientist, but I have to at this point, but half a consultant. So for me, that I moved from in-house at Vodafone into consultancy now, I wouldn't, I'm oversimplifying here, but the job almost hasn't changed that much in a certain way, because before, because now I need to keep my clients happy when I do the delivery, especially if it's say a 3-4 months project. I can't just say, "Oh, do you know what? I'll see you in 3 months," right? I have to do weekly meetings and keep providing updates. But that's and nice slides and explain to people, explain twice, 3 times, etc. But this is exactly the type of things that I was doing in my previous job, because I had the audience was different, was in-house, but it was the same challenges. So yeah.
Perfect. Great. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to build on that, is that, we were talking about performance or costs. Part of what I'm seeing, and I've got a number of projects that are involving this, is looking at the organizational needs versus the employee needs. And I think that's another underlying theme that is going to impact around this performance versus cost reduction type of thing, because what might be good for the organization may not necessarily be perceived to be good for the employees at this particular stage. So I think that's another balancing act that the people analytics teams are going to have to consider, and HR groups are also going to have to consider that. You know, everybody wants to be working from home, but actually, you know, do they? Is that the right thing? And does the job enable productivity to be improved or maintained? You know, there are lots of different balancing acts that we've got to think about, and I think Oliver and Alessandro have explained that balancing process really well.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks. Okay, let's move on to one of our next questions, and again feeds really well into what you were just mentioning there, Dave, about looking at the employee perspective. And so one of the questions, the next question we had was really around the DE&I agenda. And I guess we know that there's the gender pay gap reporting is kind of in force, has been for a while. And we also know that there's the EU Parity Directive, which comes into force next year, 2024. So which means any company, organization that has operations in the EU, they have to do a lot more reporting around their gender pay gaps, around parity, around pay across gender, and be able to kind of report that and do a piece of work to find out what that parity is, because it's going to be based on actual job categories or on actual jobs. So so the question we kind of had was in relation to the DE&I agenda, how do you recommend, or how can people analytics help actually inform and support the DE&I requirements? Dave, do you want to? I know you're doing work like that around amongst some of your kind of clients. What have you been doing? What have you seen, and what do you think? How is PA actually helping to feed into that?
I think it's a real interesting but challenging piece of work. This you mentioned in your lead up to the question around, you know, there's going to be more reporting pressure, and that's great. But I think we've also got to understand that DE&I is about changing the way in which an organization operates. You know, that it's about improving performance, and through showing the benefits of what a diverse and equitable workforce can do. So I think certainly people analytics can help in that identification of some case studies, some digging down. I think we need to make sure is that we're not just ticking boxes here. And you know, I'm concerned that the reporting focus can be perceived to be a bit of a, you know, tick box exercise. You know, I'm working with a global waste management company at the moment, and you know, we've gone through a big phase of finding, you know, where is the gaps in data internally, what does the external trend say, bringing the findings together, putting an action plan together, and you know, cutting the data and looking at it in different things. You know, for example, it's great to want women in leadership, but in the Middle East that's quite challenging because of the cultural perspective, you know. So there's a lot of different local and geographical nuances that need to be taken into account. So my view is that people analytics can most definitely help us bring to life some of the issues and some of the challenges. I just don't want the analytics teams, however, to get caught up in the reporting stuff, because I think that can be automated, that can be done. I think what we need to do is to look at the reporting data and start to drill down and start to find case studies positive, case studies maybe not quite so positive, that, if you like, are a call to action and are a call to people changing their behavior and their approach, because that's what DE&I is about. So I think the only thing I would add, and I know Alessandro and Oliver will have a view on it, the only thing I would add is that I think this is where I have seen that both quantitative, i.e. data, and qualitative, you know, traditional HR methods, focus groups, interviewing, etc., these two things need to come together in exploring the DE&I challenges, because the data can tell you certain things, but this is an emotional, you know, subject, and I think we need to make sure that along the way our research includes some of the more qualitative feelings type orientation. I'll stop there because I'm conscious of time and contribution from the others. Does that set the scene, I guess?
Yeah. Alessandro, has that been something that you guys have started or you've looked at in the past? What's What's your kind of, what are you seeing?
No, we do that, and I 100% subscribe to just Dave just said. I think the problem with and the EU directive, the way it's shaping is quite interesting from that point of view, because if you look at the national regulations that are now, there's UK, Ireland, there's in Spain, what they do, they really focus on the reporting. There are, like in Sweden, for example, they will say you need to give some justification for the pay gap. But essentially, it's like that type of commentary that you copy and paste across the entire board. And so what we've seen is that so far, it's literally about reporting. And that's the majority of what we've done. With the EU directive, now they're saying that, or the way it's shaping, they're saying that if you have your pay gap above a certain threshold, then you need to explain what is the problem, what are you planning to do about it, and when you're going to solve it, that if you're not going to solve it, why you're not going to solve it. So there seems to be a push for that. My view, and so maybe this is the right moment to move from a very reactive position into a proactive position where we actually want to do something about it. I think from my point of view is that analytics can help provide the arguments and then the evidence to the type of qualitative discussion that Dave was saying. Because, for example, one of the things that we do, or you can do it, is pay equity analysis. You can use statistical methods to say, there is a gap between men and women, but most of these gaps are explained by different roles, by different levels, by different experience, education, and all of these things. So there are statistical methods that can normalize across the board, and you can do that, and then you can go to what we could call the real pay gap. But even if that's explained, that's again, it explains why there is a gap. But what is missing there is the so what. What are we going to do about it? And that's where, without a fully integrated solution that goes beyond the analytics. My take, though, is that the analytics can facilitate that conversation.
Yeah, and just building on what you've just said, Alessandro, we shouldn't forget is that we could look at diversity and retention figures. We can look at engagement and the diversity groups in there. We can look at learning, and we can look at the way we recruit, and we can look at the tracking of where people drop out and why, and what impact is this from it. So I think analytics has got a huge place and part to play. It's almost like, where do we start? Because you could create an enormous agenda there. And I think it's got to come back to what we've been saying, which is, where is the original business problem that we really need to get to grips with, I guess. Sorry, Oliver, I stopped you.
No. So it's just like in line with you. So there's like the legal and regulatory reporting which is needed. But what do you really do on top of it, right? Because as a company, if you only fulfill the legal and regulatory requirements, that's what you anyway need to do. But what do you do on top, and what actions do you drive for? And I like what you said, Dave. People analytics is not only about you have data and crunch it, right? It belongs to it also getting these qualitative topics around talking to people, because data is one part of the truth. There is something which is not in data. You need always to contextualize your information which you get. You need to talk to people. More or less all the projects which I have done in the past, if you only took what is out of data, you need to challenge this actually, which people who know the business contents or the data to contextualize it. So this qualitative part is quite important. And what decisions do you make on top of the legal and regular reporting? I think that's the fun part again, to go along with the theme which we had before.
You're just a masochist, that's all, Oliver, that's all.
Sorry, can I just one? Sorry, I just Oliver and Dave just made me think. There is an example that about the need. Data is not enough, and analytics not enough. I don't know if any on the call remembers, but Google has done a lot of work to try and eliminate the bias in recruiting, but not asking their in entry salary, to avoid discriminating women against men. So there was, I don't remember if it was Google or Facebook, but last year at some point there was someone who sued the company. I think it was Google, because yes. What happened is that the bias, they were not asking about it, but there was some pre-bias that was still carried over through the progression within the career. So, you know, again, this is another example. They did lots of work on the data, they did lots of work on analytics, but that's still not enough. So I just thought it was very relevant.
Great, perfect. I think with all these topics that all these questions that we've been asking, they could be like a full one-day conference on each of them. I think they go deep into so many aspects. But I think that, you know, some really kind of pertinent points there about it. You know, it starts with it maybe started by the legal compliance aspect, but it's about, you know, what are the stories that are coming out of that? What are the case studies? You know, how does that mean? What does it mean to actually start to talk to people to find out what's really happening and what's the actual objective really when it comes down to it, and how we move from that kind of reactive to proactive. Okay, I want to move on to the next question because I'm conscious of time. How can data and analytics actually help help engage the stakeholders in that whole workforce planning process? So, like I said, there's lots of areas that go into workforce planning. How and I'm going to put this to Dave first, if I can. You know, how can analytics actually help HR engage the stakeholders in the actual workforce planning process? What have you seen? What have you been doing? What kind of conversations have you been having with some of the companies you work with around that issue?
I think for me, you know, why should CHROs, HRDs be interested in people analytics? And, you know, my set response tends to revolve around, you know, it's about you more effectively deploying your people resources across the business to improve and be a successful and high performing business. Okay. Workforce planning, whether you're in a period of growth or in a period of change or shrinkage, which is maybe what we're thinking about for the following year, for me, this is a critical part of where you bring to life, where the rubber hits the road, where you start to say, you know, what's the capacity that we need for the coming year, but also what's the capability that we need to develop to ensure, you know, that we meet the business goals, the business strategy, that we have a plan to address some of the challenges, that we change our talent practices where we need to make sure that, you know, we're actually addressing some of these business issues. And ultimately, you know, measuring the outcomes. Have we made a difference by doing this? So for me, people analytics and SWP, it's no surprise to me that it's suddenly become very important. I believe every talent management strategy is probably going to be a strategic workforce planning strategy in many respects, because you're trying to make sure this alignment again between business, how you're going to change, making sure the practices are determining it, and more importantly, seeing what value you come to. Yes, I think I've been involved with a Swedish manufacturing company and doing some work. And what was interesting is that it started off as a strategic workforce planning, but actually it then started to move into a scenario planning. And I think I've seen this quite a lot, where organizations are going a step beyond workforce planning and actually looking at it from a scenario planning point of view, because a lot of businesses got burned during the pandemic because they'd never thought that that was ever going to happen. And so a lot of organizations are now starting to think about, how can we deploy our people? How do we use that more effectively? What capability have we got to grow? And of course, this all then starts to trigger and feed into DE&I, hybrid, remote working, etc., etc. So I'm going to stop there because I'm conscious of time, but I think workforce planning is a critical activity HR has to get involved with, because it's about strategic outcomes. And that's what we're supposedly here to deliver and be involved with. You know, I've done a lot of data that I've collected, and unfortunately, most of our HR business partners are spending their time solving operational puzzles, 38% of their time solving operational puzzles, and a very limited time, 15%, on future planning, looking at these sorts of things. So for me, I think this is a real critical opportunity for both HR and people analytics to then start to critique and analyze and bring to life some of these challenges. Alessandro, what do you think?
No, I'm as usual. I'm with you, Dave, on this. It's I think with the challenge with strategic workforce planning is it is a complex activity. It's long-term activity, and even building a plan that ideal about the workforce that hopefully is strategic, even if it's not strategic, workforce plan is something that requires a lot of inputs and lots of thinking. So it requires input from a business point of view, it requires data, it requires the involvement of HR, and there's also a question as where the strategic or workforce planning sits. Does it sit in HR? Does it sit in finance? Does it sit in the operational function? And let's remember that often this is happening in, say, in I don't know, in factories, in call centers, where they really need. But although for these people, really, it's about scheduling. It's a very tight, and the role that analytics can play, I think, is enabling and facilitating the use of data. And back to these points, and also I think Oliver mentioned it earlier. The question is, how can we become, or let me rephrase it, how can we stay relevant? How can we help show some value now in the next couple of months rather than in 1 year when the strategic workforce planning tool is up and running? So that's where maybe I think a company that has an analytics team can leverage that analytics team and say, show me some pilots, show me some examples, get engaged, use the financial data, use the HR data, pull them together and show me what you can do. Clearly the question is, what am I going to show? And the answer should be, let me show you some business outcome, some projection, something. And that's where then you're not showing the benefit to the HR business partner. The HR business partner has something tangible to engage with their business leaders, and then they start. And I think that and the discussion starts, the ball starts rolling, and there is more space to think longer term, I think.
And I think it gives us the opportunity to actually try to be strategic, because we are trying to think about tomorrow as well as today, you know, and HR has aspired to be strategic for a long time. I think that's why workforce planning is such an important discipline. Oliver, how about you?
Yeah, I think also workforce planning or strategic workforce planning is one of the topics which people understand completely different.
Yes.
So there is, like, when you ask famously 10 people, you get 12 different answers. For some is workforce planning, even strategic workforce planning, the rolling headcount report, headcount forecast for the next 3 months. For the other one, what kind of skills do I need in 10 years because I want to transform my business? So what do you want to achieve? So that's the most important topic. I did already back in my consulting time, so this was 2000 till 2008, I was consultant. I did one strategic workforce planning project in 2006 for SAP, where they wanted to know, how do I transform my organization from on-premise developers moving to cloud? So this was really a strategic project where at that time I support. So it's quite important. What do you want to achieve? And then also start small. So we had it also this morning. Alessandro is like, it's not about the tool. Definitely not. Don't focus on a complex, expensive tool at the beginning. Start with a small business unit or smaller business unit in your context where you have a good business sponsor who wants to drive this. And you can do this at the beginning also with not investing millions in a tool, and rather starting small and showing impact than doing this for the whole company if your company has a larger context. So this would be my advice. And business sponsorship is everywhere important, but even more important than strategic workforce planning, because otherwise you will just not move forward and your project will not get any kind of success and also no fun at the end.
Great. Okay, I'm going to move to the end. So we've got one last kind of question. So this question is really, again, I'm going to ask it again of Oliver, actually, because it kind of feeds onto what you were just been saying. So this is really about the HR leader themselves, and how is people analytics actually increasing the HR leader's impact, not just on the business, but also in the boardroom. So not only the impact in obviously delivering those outcomes for the company, but also their individual impact as a HR leader as well. Have you seen, and maybe you haven't, have you seen any ways that the engagement with people analytics has actually increased the impact and capacity of the HR leader themselves?
Yeah, Yeah, I've seen this, you know, when an HR leader or a CHRO definitely sees and believes in the value also, and also the interest to develop in this direction. I've seen companies now that are a bit more advanced in people analytics, where like the people strategy function, the people analytics, and sometimes also the digital HR function are combined together, because data is really seen as a strategic enabler, like it is also in other functions. And you see now also partially in companies which are very advanced, even these companies, these roles are moved into CHRO roles. I think we are decades away to have this like a mass phenomenon, but it goes into this direction. And even you see now also in CHRO requirements, recently talked to executive headhunters, that the requirement, depending on the company, that the CHRO has at least definitely an interest, but also the capacity to use data to leverage strategic decision making increases as a requirement also for the CHRO roles. So this is like, it starts with HR business partners. In a couple of years' time, when you as HR business partner are not used to leverage data for influencing your stakeholders, your employability decreases, and this will happen also on the CHRO side in the same way from my point of view. And you see this already happening now, and this will accelerate even faster in the future.
Alessandro, do you have a similar experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a work in progress in my view, because I think it's the same thing, similar to what Oliver said. It's something similar I said at the beginning. The question is, what is important for you? How can people analytics has people analytics has the opportunity to provide data and insights that are evidence-based to a CHRO. The CHRO, for the first time, in a way, can start talking data, talking numbers, something that they weren't used to do. So, the CFO talks numbers all the time. Whether those numbers make sense or not, it doesn't matter, really. It's numbers, so it's hard evidence. Everybody believes them. The CHRO never did this. So if CHRO that understands the analytics team can start using those numbers, and then clearly then the analytics team needs to produce the right numbers or the right insights, then it becomes all sorts of. I've seen CHROs that once they understand this, once they get these things, the discussion changes. But there has to be, again, it's clearly the people. I think the responsibility is in both sides. So the people analytics team, they need to demand to be relevant, and the CHRO needs them needs to listen, to make them to make them the right projects, etc., and so on and so forth.
Great, perfect. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so it's now past. So we've gone through a hell of a lot in this very short period of time. So I want to first of all, I just want to thank all the panelists for your contributions. Obviously, I want to thank the attendees for you coming along as well. I just want to highlight the three the main points that came out of there was reducing operational and moving to become increasingly strategic was one of the main things I think that came out. Moving from being quantitative to being qualitative, I think was something that Dave mentioned. Moving from being reactive to proactive, moving from the compliance aspect to actually really talking to people and generating those stories. And the one that I like the most is that actually people analytics can also be fun, which Oliver mentioned there as well. So with that, like I said, I want to thank everybody for attending. We will be in contact with you shortly, and hopefully we'll see you again on our next event. Thank you very much for everybody, and to Jayan as well to help in set this up as well. Thank you all for attending.